Right. Now, I mean, I'm going to throw this one at you real quick. Now, we know we have a regulation problem with some of the big businesses here. What are your ideas about protecting some of our natural resources here?
You know, I look at the regulations that apply to a lot of the areas outside of here. I mean, there's the regulations on runoff in some of the areas in the Eastern Shore that are more affected, I think, than here, and I tend to agree with them. I tend to think that we have a lot of pollutants that end up in the Chesapeake Bay. We want to keep the Chesapeake Bay pristine for this generation, the next generation, and many to come.
Right.
And we have to be sensitive to that fact. Now, that being said, again, we also need to have some reason put into the approach to applying those rules.
Right.
Oftentimes in this area, in developing new plots of land with issues of stormwater and wastewater runoff, I've discovered that the local zoning or the local planning organization in Howard County can be a little bit too tight in their application of the regulations without being, how do I put it, creative in determining how the issues can be resolved best. And that once some of the owners of the land and some of the business investors have looked at it and worked cooperatively with the local board, they've been able to come up with solutions that met both the expectation of the residents in the area and the businesses in the area, as well as the new investors' expectations. But it has to be one that looks at business as not the opponent, but as somebody who is a partner, and then come up with solutions that are both creative, cost-effective, and protective of the residents and the natural resources we keep in place.
All right, now I want to change gears and talk about education just briefly here. Now, we know in the state of Maryland, we have schools that are in the top when it comes down, in the nation when it comes down to our education, but we also have schools in the bottom. What do we need to do to fix this disparity?
Well, let's start with the good news. Howard County is clearly one of the top 1 or 2 educational systems in the nation. We've touted that, and I'm proud of that fact. And it comes from the fact that we funded fairly well, and we received additionally some supplemental funding come from the state. On the other hand, the Thornton Act 2002 and revised in 2004 was an attempt to try to address some of the inequities that are involved funding-wise throughout the state. So what we've seen is between Howard County, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, and Baltimore City that are some of the 2 extreme areas of success and lack of success in education. We've seen that funding doesn't necessarily bring educational success and parity.
Right.
Thornton was able to bring them much, much closer, but we still know that a lot of the deficiencies tend to be in school systems like Baltimore and unfortunately like Prince George's County, as well as some of the rural counties that have had some significant issues with trying to bring their students up to a level of academic success.
Right.
How do you make that work? How do you fix that problem? I still have to go that some competition will allow that to happen. When you take a look at what's happening in Washington, D.C., you discover that the introduction of competition through the charter schools actually started making people understand that there were alternatives to the local public school system. Even though it was under the public school domain, it allowed people to see some levels of success that they hadn't been seeing for years. You take that into account, and then you look at 2 other major issues that have probably become quite difficult to get through politically, but need to be considered. First of all, we need to look at certification of teachers and dealing with certain areas of teacher certification where we have difficulty finding good teachers, and perhaps reducing some of the certification levels in areas like science to allow good instructors who have had actual experience in industry and have the ability to teach high school students and middle school students but don't necessarily have the teaching credentials that are minimally required right now. So we need to come up with exceptions to that rule that allow us to fill some of those voids that we're experiencing. The second area, I think, though, and I think you probably know where I'm going with this, is that we need to look at merit pay. Because at the moment, we don't have a way of working with educators in this state who are exceptionally talented and do very well,
right,
and reward them accordingly. And the flip side of that is we have difficulty in discouraging people who are underperforming as instructors and find a way to make them understand that they need to improve, and I think that merit pay will do that. Finally, I will indicate that that will deal with some of the parity and inequity issues. I think that the third thing we need to look at is some kind of mechanism for allowing more money to go into the classrooms. I think that a lot of the deficiencies we're seeing in some of the other systems is that we're losing money at the administrative level, we're losing money in procurement, and we need better accountability for the money that's flowing into systems that are failing or not doing as well, and make sure that that money goes to the classroom, goes to those teachers, goes to to the books and the supplies and the salaries in those classrooms. And if we can do that and become more accountable across the state of Maryland, we should start to see a better evening of results.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier about making cuts across the board. Now, of course, that has to include education. What would you like to see in the education system that you would like to cut from the programs right now?
Let's go back to the administrative piece. I clearly say it can't be programs within, well, I'm sorry, it can't be within the classroom in general. In other words, we're trying to make sure that the classroom teaching ratios stay the same. I would say we're starting to see some of the changes at the administrative level. Some of the expectations the community has affect me personally, and I feel personally a bit injured by it, but I also have to recognize that it's part of what's going on this year. The example I'm most thinking of is that community organizations that utilize school environments, PTAs, and activities like boys and girls basketball are starting to see increases in the costs that they have to pay to cover the usage of the school facilities. Right. What we're going to see is a lot of the peripheral kinds of expenditures within the school system are going to be somewhat reduced over time. I do believe that teachers may need to freeze their salary for 1 year. I think that there's an unfortunate situation, but I also know that many of the people I have worked with have been laid off over the past several years and have experienced serious reductions in salary. But most of the teachers have seen at least somewhat modest but progressive increases in their salary. And I think that you will probably have to see that freeze for 1 year to make up for the fact that there's going to be a serious reduction in federal funding coming this year. Right. And it's going to hit across the board. I'm not running on that basis. I would love to find a way to continue to fund it. But when I say across the board freeze, I kind of mean it across the board in almost every area.
Sounds well. Well, Mr. Robinson, it has been a pleasure. Now, for more information on Mr. Jeff Robinson, please visit his website at electjeffrobinson.com. And for even more information, please visit our website on thehillmedia.com.